Blood, bullets, and cold, hard cash. Those were the only currencies Dominic Castiglione ever truly understood. As the ruthless, untouchable head of the city's most feared syndicate, he walked into a run-down, grease-stained diner, expecting nothing more than a cowering owner and a thick envelope of protection money. He certainly didn't expect a tired waitress, pouring lukewarm coffee, to look him dead in the eye and deliver a chilling warning that would save his life and instantly turn her into his greatest vulnerability. What happens when an underworld kingpin realizes the only person he can trust is the woman serving his pie? Prepare for a gritty story of shattered loyalties, violent rivalries, and a deadly obsession. The neon sign outside Sal's diner flickered with a persistent, annoying buzz, casting sickly pink reflections across the rain-slicked pavement of Hell's Kitchen. It was a miserable Tuesday night in late October, the kind of night where the cold seeped straight through the soles of your shoes and into your bones. Chloe Miller stood behind the scratched Formica counter, a damp rag in her hand, staring blankly at the reflection of the street in the front window. She was 24, exhausted, and running on exactly 3 hours of sleep and 4 cups of bitter, burnt coffee. Her brown hair was tied up in a messy bun that was slowly escaping its confines, and her apron bore the faint, stubborn stains of cherry pie filling and cheap fryer grease. She wiped down the same spot on the counter for the 5th time, her mind a million miles away, calculating the exact amount she needed to keep her younger brother's physical therapy appointments going through the end of the month. "Chloe," a trembling voice called out from the swinging kitchen doors. She turned to see Salvatore Russo, the owner of the diner, looking worse than she had ever seen him. Sal was a large man, usually red-faced and boisterous, quick with a joke and generous with free fries. Tonight, his skin was the color of old oatmeal, sweat beaded on his balding forehead, and his hands shook violently as he clutched a thin, manila envelope. "Sal, are you okay? You look like you're having a heart attack," Chloe said, dropping the rag and taking a step toward him. "They're coming, kid," Sal whispered, his eyes darting frantically toward the glass front door. "I'm short. I'm so damn short, Chloe. The plumbing went out last week, and the supplier raised the meat prices, and I only have 2,000. Chloe felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She had worked at the diner long enough to know how things operated in this neighborhood. You paid your taxes to the city, and you paid your insurance to the Castiglione family. If you missed a payment to the city, you got a strongly worded letter. If you missed a payment to the Castigliones, you got a broken jaw, a shattered kneecap, or your livelihood burned to the ground. "How much do you owe them, Sal?" Chloe asked, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. 5, Sal choked out, wiping his face with a trembling hand. 5,000. They said this was the last extension. God, Chloe, you need to go to the back. Hide in the pantry. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Before Chloe could argue, the chime above the diner door rang out, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. The heavy glass door swung open, bringing with it the smell of rain, expensive cologne, and impending violence. 3 men stepped over the threshold. The 2 in the back were built like brick walls, wearing dark, tailored suits that barely concealed the bulky holsters strapped beneath their jackets. But it was the man in the front who sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Dominic Castiglione didn't walk. He commanded space. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a charcoal wool suit that easily cost more than Sal made in 6 months. His dark hair was perfectly styled, lightly dusted with raindrops, but his face was carved from granite. He possessed sharp patrician features, a strong jawline, and eyes so pale blue they looked like fractured ice. There was a terrifying stillness to him. He was 28, but he carried the heavy, suffocating authority of a man who held the power of life and death in his bare hands. He had taken over the family 2 years ago after his father was gunned down in a Brooklyn barbershop, and Dominic had responded by painting the streets red. "Salvatore," Dominic said. His voice was smooth, deep, and entirely devoid of warmth. Sal whimpered, practically shrinking behind the cash register. "Mr. Castiglione, I didn't expect you personally. Leo was busy," Dominic replied, unbuttoning his suit jacket with long, elegant fingers. He stepped up to the counter, taking a seat on one of the red vinyl stools. He didn't even glance at Chloe. "And I was in the neighborhood. It's a miserable night, Sal. Let's make this quick." The envelope. Sal swallowed hard, the sound audible in the tense silence. He pushed the thin manila envelope across the scratched counter. It slid halfway and stopped. Dominic looked at the envelope. He didn't reach for it. He didn't need to. One of the massive men behind him, a bruiser with a flattened nose who looked like he enjoyed hurting people, stepped forward, picked it up, and tore it open. He thumbed through the bills with practiced speed. "$2,000, boss," the bruiser grunted, tossing the envelope back onto the counter in disgust. Dominic sighed. It wasn't an angry sigh. It was a disappointed one, which was somehow much worse. He finally lifted his icy blue gaze and fixed it on Sal. "Salvatore, we had a conversation about this last month. Do you remember our conversation?" Dominic's tone was conversational, like a disappointed teacher speaking to a failing student. "Mr. Castiglione, please, I swear on my mother's grave, the plumbing—" "I am not a plumber, Sal," Dominic interrupted softly. "I am a businessman. You pay me for a service. My family ensures that your diner doesn't get robbed, that the local gangs leave your waitresses alone, and that your windows don't mysteriously shatter in the middle of the night. You are not paying for the service. I just need one more week. Next Friday, I'll have the rest, with interest," Sal begged, tears welling in his eyes. Dominic stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. Then, he gave a nearly imperceptible nod to the bruiser. "Silvio, break his left knee. Leave the right one so he can still work the grill." "No, please," Sal screamed as Silvio reached across the counter, his massive hands grabbing Sal by the collar of his grease-stained shirt, hauling the older man over the barrier like he weighed nothing. Sal crashed onto the checkered linoleum floor, scrambling backward in a desperate, pathetic attempt to escape. Silvio pulled a short, heavy steel baton from his coat. Chloe's heart hammered furiously against her ribs. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to run, to hide in the back, just as Sal had told her. She was nobody. She was a waitress, drowning in medical debt, invisible to men like Dominic Castiglione. But as she watched Silvio raise the steel baton, ready to shatter the leg of the only man who had given her a job when she was completely desperate, her mind flashed to something she had seen just 10 minutes prior. She had gone out the back door to toss the trash into the alley dumpster. Through the heavy sheet of rain, she had noticed a man in a red leather jacket acting strangely near a sleek black Lincoln Continental parked down the street. She had thought he was trying to steal a hubcap until she saw him roll out from beneath the undercarriage and sprint away into the darkness. Chloe's hands gripped the wet rag so tightly her knuckles turned bone white. "Stop," Chloe said. The word wasn't a scream. It was spoken at a normal volume, but in the tense, silent diner, it cracked like a whip. Silvio paused, the baton hovering mid-air, and looked at her as if a piece of furniture had suddenly spoken. The second guard reached toward his jacket. Dominic Castiglione slowly turned his head, his pale eyes finally landing on Chloe. His expression was unreadable, a mask of cold indifference, but there was a faint flicker of irritation in his gaze. "Excuse me?" Dominic said quietly. Chloe's throat felt like sandpaper. Her legs were trembling so badly she had to lean her hips against the back counter to stay upright. But she met the mob boss's eyes, refusing to look away. "I said, stop," Chloe repeated, her voice remarkably steady. She took a breath, letting the terrifying reality of what she was about to do wash over her. "Before you let your gorilla break an old man's kneecaps over a miserable $3,000, you should probably know something." Dominic tilted his head a fraction of an inch. "And what is that, sweetheart?" Chloe didn't flinch at the condescending tone. "You should probably know that about 10 minutes ago. A guy in a red leather jacket with a spider tattoo on his neck rolled under your black Lincoln outside and wired a heavy rectangular package to the undercarriage. So, you might want to hold off on the beatings and call a mechanic. Or a bomb squad." The diner descended into an absolute, deafening silence. Even the humming neon sign outside seemed to hold its breath. Silvio lowered the steel baton, his heavy brow furrowing in confusion. Sal remained frozen on the floor, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief that his quiet, unassuming waitress had just interrupted a Mafia execution. Dominic didn't blink. His icy blue eyes stayed locked onto Chloe's face, searching her expression with the predatory intensity of a wolf, trying to determine if it was looking at prey or a trap. He looked for the telltale signs of a lie, the shifting eyes, the nervous swallow, the slight tremor in the voice. He found none. Chloe stared back at him, her chin tilted up defensively, her face pale but resolute. "Silvio," Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its conversational smoothness. "Check the car. Don't touch anything. Just look." The bruiser shoved his baton back into his coat and sprinted out the front door, the bell chiming wildly behind him. The ensuing 2 minutes were the longest of Chloe's life. Dominic remained seated on the vinyl stool, perfectly still. He reached into his breast pocket, withdrew a silver case, and pulled out a cigarette. He lit it with a matching silver lighter, taking a slow drag. The smell of expensive tobacco filled the diner, masking the scent of stale grease. "What's your name?" Dominic asked quietly, a plume of blue smoke escaping his lips. "Chloe," she answered. "Chloe Miller." "Tell me exactly what you saw." "Chloe Miller." "I took the garbage out to the alley," she said, forcing her voice to stay even. "Your car is parked by the fire hydrant near the corner. It was raining hard, but there's a street lamp right there. I saw a man on the ground. Red jacket, dark hair. When he turned his head, I saw a large black spider tattooed on the left side of his neck. He shoved a box wrapped in black tape up near the front axle. Then he ran off toward 9th Avenue. Dominic's jaw tightened imperceptibly. The spider tattoo. That was the calling card of the Moretti family, a rival syndicate that had been making aggressive moves on Castiglione territory for the past 6 months. Before Dominic could ask another question, the diner door burst open. Silvio stumbled inside, completely ignoring the rain soaking his expensive suit. His face, previously hardened into a permanent scowl, was completely drained of color. "Boss," Silvio breathed, his voice tight with panic. "She's not lying. There's a block of C4 wired directly to the ignition block. We turn the key. The whole block goes up in flames." Sal let out a strangled gasp from the floor. Dominic's expression hardened into something truly terrifying. The cool, collected businessman vanished, replaced instantly by the ruthless Mafia boss who had conquered the city's underworld. He dropped the half-smoked cigarette onto the linoleum and crushed it beneath the heel of his Oxford shoe. "Call the sweepers," Dominic ordered his other guard, pulling a sleek cell phone from his pocket. "Tell them we need a disposal team here, discreetly, right now. And get a secondary car to the back alley. We are exposed here." He turned back to Chloe. For the first time, he truly looked at her. He took in her cheap, stained apron, the dark circles of exhaustion under her eyes, and the fierce, defiant set of her jaw. She had just saved his life. If she hadn't spoken up, he and his men would have walked out of the diner, gotten into the Lincoln, and been turned into ash on 47th Street. "You have sharp eyes, Miss Miller," Dominic said softly. "I pay attention," Chloe replied. "Now, I believe we have a deal. I gave you your life. You leave Sal alone and forgive his debt." Dominic let out a harsh, bitter chuckle. "You don't get to dictate terms to me, sweetheart. But yes, Salvatore is off the hook for tonight. Consider his debt paid in full." He looked down at the trembling diner owner. "Get up, Sal, and get to the back." Sal didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled to his feet and practically dived through the swinging kitchen doors. "All right, we're leaving out the back," Dominic said, turning to his men. "Silvio, you take point." "Wait," Chloe said, her heart skipping a beat as an awful realization washed over her. She rushed around the counter. The man who planted the bomb, the guy with the red jacket. When he was running away, he stopped at the corner. He looked back. Dominic froze. He looked back at the car? "No," Chloe whispered, feeling the blood drain from her face. "He looked at the alley. He looked right at me. He knows I saw him." Dominic's eyes widened a fraction. "Get down," he roared, lunging forward just as the screech of tires echoed from the street outside. Chloe barely had time to register his massive form flying over the counter toward her before the world erupted into violence. The men who had planted the bomb weren't waiting for Dominic to turn the key. They had come back to finish the job manually. Automatic gunfire tore through the quiet night. The thick glass windows of Sal's diner shattered instantly, spraying deadly, razor-sharp shards across the room in a glittering, violent wave. Dominic hit Chloe hard, tackling her to the floor behind the thick wooden barrier of the counter. His heavy body covered hers entirely, shielding her from the storm of bullets and glass tearing through the diner. The noise was deafening, a relentless, percussive roar of shattered plates, screaming metal, and explosive gunfire. Chloe clamped her hands over her ears, squeezing her eyes shut as dust and debris rained down on them. She could feel Dominic's heart hammering against her back, his heavy coat smelling of rain, gunpowder, and danger. "Silvio, suppressive fire!" Dominic yelled over the chaos, pulling a sleek black handgun from his shoulder holster with terrifying speed. Above them, Silvio and the other guard returned fire, the booming retort of their heavy-caliber weapons shaking the floorboards. Outside, a car engine revved furiously, tires squealing against the wet asphalt, as the attackers realized they had lost the element of surprise and sped away. The gunfire abruptly stopped, leaving behind an eerie, ringing silence, broken only by the hiss of a ruptured espresso machine and the patter of rain coming through the destroyed front windows. Dominic slowly pushed himself up, his eyes scanning the ruined diner. He looked down at Chloe, who was trembling violently on the floor, covered in plaster dust and a few stray coffee beans. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his hands quickly but gently checking her arms and shoulders for blood. "No," Chloe stammered, coughing on the dust. "I'm fine. I think I'm fine." Dominic stood, pulling her to her feet with one strong hand. He looked out the shattered window at the street, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might snap. The Morettis had just declared open war. "Boss, the secondary car is in the alley," Silvio called out, reloading his weapon with a sharp clack. "We need to move before the cops get here. The gunfire is going to bring half the precinct." "Let's go," Dominic said. He holstered his weapon and turned to Chloe, his hand wrapping tightly around her wrist. "You're coming with us." Chloe yanked her arm back, panic surging through her chest. "What? No, absolutely not. You said Sal's debt was paid. I saved your life. We're even. I am not going anywhere with the Mafia." Dominic stepped into her space, his towering frame forcing her to look up at him. The coldness was back in his eyes, hard and unyielding. "Listen to me very carefully, Chloe," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Those were Moretti hitmen. They are not known for their mercy, and they are not known for leaving loose ends. That man saw you looking at him. He knows you can identify him. By tomorrow morning, they will know exactly who you are, where you live, and who you care about. If you stay here, you are a dead woman." Chloe felt the air leave her lungs. I can go to the police. I can get protection." Dominic let out a harsh breath. "The police? Half the cops in this precinct are on my payroll. The other half are on Moretti's. They can't protect you from a syndicate war. I am the only one who can keep you alive, right now." He grabbed her wrist again, his grip iron tight, but not bruising. "You walked into my world the second you opened your mouth to save my life, Miss Miller," Dominic said, pulling her toward the kitchen doors. "And right now, you are coming with me, whether you want to or not." The rain lashed aggressively against the tinted, bulletproof glass of the heavily armored Cadillac Escalade. Inside, the heavy silence was punctuated only by the rhythmic squeak of the windshield wipers and the harsh, ragged sound of Chloe's breathing. She was pressed against the far door, her knees pulled tight to her chest, her knuckles stark white where she gripped her damp apron. Across the wide leather seat, Dominic Castiglione sat in perfect stillness. The passing streetlights of Hell's Kitchen cast erratic, golden shadows across his sharp features, highlighting the hard line of his jaw and the dangerous, predatory calm in his pale blue eyes. He was watching her, not with pity, but with a calculating intensity that made Chloe's skin prickle. In the front seat, Silvio sat beside a driver named Dante, his massive frame tense as he monitored the police scanners buzzing softly on the dashboard. "Breathe, Miss Miller," Dominic said, his voice a low, smooth rumble that somehow cut through the hum of the powerful engine. "You're going into shock." "I am not going into shock," Chloe snapped, though the violent tremor in her hands betrayed her. "I'm being kidnapped. There's a distinct difference." "You are being extracted," Dominic corrected smoothly, leaning forward slightly. "There is a hit squad actively hunting you because you decided to play hero. If I had left you at Sal's, you would be dead before the police even finished taping off the crime scene. So what? You're my knight in shining armor now." Chloe choked out a bitter laugh, the adrenaline finally giving way to a sickening wave of terror. "You were going to shatter an old man's legs over $3,000. "Business is business," Dominic replied, entirely unbothered by her accusation. "But you saved my life. In my world, a debt of blood is absolute. I protect what is mine, and right now, your safety is my responsibility." "I am not yours," Chloe spat fiercely. Dominic's eyes darkened, a flash of something unreadable passing through them. We can argue semantics later. Right now, I need to know who else the Morettis can use to get to you. Parents? A boyfriend? The question hit Chloe like a physical blow to the stomach. All the air rushed out of her lungs as a horrifying realization crashed down on her. The man, in the alley. He had seen her face. It wouldn't take a genius to ask around the diner, find out where the only female waitress lived, and discover who she went home to. Oh, God! Chloe gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Liam! Dominic's posture shifted instantly. Who is Liam? My brother, Chloe said, panic raising her voice to a frantic pitch. My younger brother. He's 19. He was in a terrible car accident last year. He's in a wheelchair. He can't walk. He can't defend himself. He's alone at our apartment in Astoria. She lunged across the wide seat, grabbing the lapels of Dominic's expensive wool suit. You have to take me to him. Please. If they know who I am, they'll go to my apartment. Silvio turned around from the front seat, his face grim. Boss, going to Queens right now is suicide. We're exposed. Lorenzo Moretti's crew is probably already swarming the bridges. We need to get to the safe house in Tribeca. Chloe tightened her grip on Dominic's suit, tears finally spilling over her lashes. Please, I'm begging you. He's all I have. I don't care what happens to me. But if they touch him, please. Dominic looked down at her small, pale hands fisted in his jacket. For a man who had built an empire on ruthlessness, on never showing weakness and never altering a plan, the raw, desperate terror in the waitress's eyes did something entirely foreign to him. It felt like a hook sinking deep into his chest. He had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted his money, his power, or his head. He had never met someone who looked at him as their only hope for saving someone else. He lifted his gaze, meeting Silvio's waiting stare in the rearview mirror. Dante, Dominic commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Take the Queensboro Bridge. Get us to Astoria. Boss, Silvio started. I gave an order, Silvio, Dominic growled, the temperature in the SUV dropping by 10 degrees. The Escalade swerved, tires protesting against the wet asphalt as it altered its course. Chloe slumped back against the seat, a shaky sob escaping her throat. Dominic reached out, his large, warm hand covering hers where it still rested on the leather seat. It wasn't a comforting gesture, it was a grounding one, heavy and solid. We will get him, Dominic said quietly. 30 agonizing minutes later, the Escalade pulled into a grim, dimly lit street on 34th Avenue in Astoria. It was a neighborhood of cramped brick, apartment buildings, and overflowing fire escapes. Dante killed the headlights as they rolled to a stop half a block away from Chloe's building. Third floor, Chloe whispered, pointing to a dark window. Apartment 3B. Silvio, with me. Dante, keep the engine running, Dominic ordered, pulling his weapon from its holster. He turned to Chloe. You stay here. Lock the doors. Not a chance, Chloe said, her voice shaking, but her jaw set in stone. She was already reaching for the door handle. He's my brother. Dominic opened his mouth to argue, saw the absolute defiance blazing in her eyes, and realized he would have to physically tie her to the seat to keep her there. With a curt nod, he pushed his door open into the rain. They moved quickly through the shadows, slipping into the damp, poorly lit foyer of the building. The smell of boiled cabbage and stale cigarette smoke hung heavy in the air. As they crept up the narrow stairwell, Dominic took the lead, his gun raised, his body instinctively shielding Chloe's. They reached the third-floor landing. Chloe's heart stopped. The door to apartment 3B was wide open. The deadbolt had been violently splintered, the cheap wood of the doorframe shattered inward. Stay behind me, Dominic ordered, in a harsh whisper. He and Silvio moved into the apartment with terrifying, practiced efficiency. Chloe followed a second later, her hands covering her mouth to stifle a scream. The small, meticulously clean apartment she shared with Liam was destroyed. The worn fabric sofa was slashed. The small television was smashed on the floor. But the most devastating sight was in the center of the cramped living room. Liam's lightweight wheelchair lay overturned, one of its wheels still spinning lazily in the quiet room. Liam! Chloe screamed, rushing past Dominic, tearing through the tiny kitchen and into the single bedroom. Liam! The bedroom was empty. The bedsheets were torn away. His physical therapy braces were scattered across the linoleum floor. He was gone. Chloe collapsed to her knees amidst the wreckage, a raw, guttural sob tearing from her throat. She gripped her hair, rocking back and forth as the reality of her nightmare folded around her. They had him. The monsters she had only just learned existed had taken her little brother. Dominic stood in the doorway, his imposing frame blocking the exit. His jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked violently in his cheek. The sight of her kneeling in the rubble of her life, a life destroyed because she had chosen to save him, ignited a dark, terrible fury deep in his blood. "Boss," Silvio said quietly from the living room, "you need to see this." Dominic stepped out of the bedroom, leaving Chloe to her grief for a brief moment. Silvio was standing by the kitchen counter, pointing to a cheap, prepaid flip phone resting carefully on top of a stack of unpaid medical bills. Beside the phone was a single, silver, hollow-point bullet. The message was clear. "They left us a line," Silvio muttered. Dominic stared at the phone. It was a taunt. Lorenzo Moretti was a snake, a man who fought not with honor, but with poison. He used collateral. He used innocence. "Watch the door," Dominic commanded. He picked up the cheap phone and flipped it open. He didn't have to dial. There was only one number in the recent calls list. He pressed send and raised the plastic device to his ear. It rang twice before a voice answered, not Lorenzo Moretti's raspy Italian accent, but a smooth, arrogant, distinctly Irish-American drawl. Well, I was wondering how long it would take Castiglione's lapdogs to find the burner," the voice said over the line. Dominic's eyes narrowed. He recognized that voice. It belonged to Detective Thomas Gallagher, a high-ranking, deeply corrupt officer in the NYPD's 114th precinct. Gallagher was notoriously greedy, a man who played both sides of the syndicate wars for his own profit. But taking a hostage, that was a dangerous escalation for a man with a badge. "Gallagher," Dominic said softly, his voice dripping with lethal intent. "You are playing a very dangerous game. You're stepping out of your weight class." A harsh laugh crackled through the speaker. "I'm not playing anything, Dominic. I'm just doing a favor for my brother-in-law. You see, Lorenzo was quite upset about the fireworks display failing tonight, and he was even more upset to hear that some little diner rat ruined his surprise." Dominic's grip on the phone tightened until the plastic began to creak. Gallagher was married to Lorenzo Moretti's sister. It was a closely guarded secret, a familial tie that explained how the Moretti family had evaded so many federal raids over the last 6 months. "Where is the boy, Thomas?" Dominic asked, his tone dangerously calm. "The cripple? He's safe. For now," Gallagher sneered. "Lorenzo wants a meeting. No soldiers, no guns. Just you, him, and the paperwork for the shipping docks on the East River. You sign over the port territory, and the girl gets her brother back. If you don't show up at Pier 42 by 3 I'm going to put a bullet in the kid's head and drop him in the water myself. If you touch a single hair on his head," Dominic swore, his voice dropping to a demonic whisper, "I won't just kill you, Gallagher. I will skin you alive and burn your precinct to the ground with you inside it. 3 a.m. Castiglione." "Tick-tock," Gallagher said, and the line went dead. Dominic slowly lowered the phone. He turned to find Chloe standing in the doorway of the kitchen. Her face was ashen, stained with tears, but the absolute panic had been replaced by a hardened, chilling clarity. She had heard enough of the one-sided conversation to understand the stakes. "They want something from you," Chloe stated, her voice trembling but resolute. "In exchange for Liam. They want my territory on the docks," Dominic replied honestly. "It's the most lucrative smuggling route in the city. If I give it to Lorenzo Moretti, he controls the eastern seaboard. He becomes untouchable." Chloe swallowed hard. "So, what happens now? You walk away? He's just a waitress's brother. He means nothing to your business." Dominic closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He stopped mere inches from her, forcing her to look up into his terrifyingly calm blue eyes. "I told you," Dominic said, his voice a low, vibrating promise that sent a shiver down Chloe's spine. "I protect what is mine. You saved my life, Chloe, which means your brother is now my family's problem. Lorenzo Moretti thinks he can use you to break me." Dominic reached up, his gloved hand gently brushing a stray, dusty curl of brown hair away from her tear-stained cheek. The touch was startlingly gentle for a man whose hands were built for violence. "He is about to find out exactly why they call me the devil of Hell's Kitchen," Dominic promised. "We are going to get Liam back. And then, I am going to paint the docks with Lorenzo Moretti's blood. Chloe stared up at the Mafia boss, realizing with terrifying certainty that her quiet, invisible life was gone forever. She was now tethered to a monster, but right now, he was the only monster capable of fighting the ones who had taken her brother. "Okay," she whispered, her eyes burning with a dark newfound fire. "What do we do?" The underground parking garage of the Tribeca safe house smelled of high-octane fuel and damp concrete. Dante slammed the Escalade into park, and the heavy doors opened into a fortress. It wasn't a glamorous penthouse. It was a secure, windowless sub-basement beneath a legitimate import-export business owned by the Castiglione family. Dominic led Chloe past reinforced steel doors and a dozen heavily armed soldiers who snapped to attention the moment he entered. The air crackled with a dangerous energy. The men recognized the grim set of their boss's jaw. They were going to war. In the center of the vast armory stood a long, scarred oak table, piled high with blueprints, tactical radios, and enough firepower to overtake a small island. Waiting for them were Dominic's most trusted lieutenants, Matteo, a grizzled tactician missing 2 fingers on his left hand, and Silas, a towering enforcer with a spiderweb scar across his throat. Lorenzo called it in. "Boss," Matteo said, his gravelly voice cutting through the tension as he pointed to a sprawling blueprint of the East River docks. "Pier 42. He wants you there at 3 in the morning. He's stacking the deck. We've got lookouts reporting at least 30 Moretti soldiers, locking down the perimeter from Corlear's Hook Park all the way to the water. They've got sniper nests on the old rusted cranes." "It's a slaughterhouse, Dominic," Silas added, racking the slide of an assault rifle. "Even if you hand over the deed to the shipping ports, Lorenzo isn't letting you walk out of there, and he sure as hell isn't letting the girl's brother live. He wants to wipe you off the board tonight." Chloe stood by the doorway, her wet clothes clinging to her shivering frame. She wrapped her arms around herself, listening to the men dissect her brother's impending murder like it was a chess match. A heavy, suffocating panic threatened to pull her under, but a sudden, burning spark of anger anchored her. She was done being the victim. She was done being terrified. Dominic leaned over the table, his pale blue eyes tracing the architectural lines of Pier 42. "We hit them from the water. We take the Castiglione speedboats, cut the engines 50 yards out, and flank the snipers." "It won't work," Chloe said. The entire room went dead silent. Matteo and Silas turned to stare at her, their expressions a mix of shock and irritation. In their world, women, especially civilian women, did not interrupt a Mafia war council. Dominic, however, slowly straightened up. He didn't look angry. He looked intensely curious. "Explain," he commanded softly. Chloe walked forward, her cheap canvas sneakers squeaking against the polished concrete. She pushed past Silas, ignoring his intimidating glare, and planted her hands on the edge of the oak table, looking directly at the blueprints. "You can't flank them from the water," Chloe said, her finger tracing the jagged coastline on the paper. "Lorenzo Moretti chose Pier 42 for a reason, but not the reason you think. The waterfront there isn't deep enough for speedboats to get close without scraping the submerged concrete barriers they installed during the 2018 seawall reinforcement. The noise will give you away before you even drop anchor." Matteo frowned, leaning closer to the map. "How the hell does a Waitress know about the East River seawall reinforcements?" "Because before my father died, he was a foreman at Pier 42, Chloe shot back, her voice ringing with hard-earned authority. "I grew up on those docks bringing him lunch. I know every rusted shipping container, every blind spot, and every inch of that pier." Dominic's eyes darkened with a sudden, fierce respect. The arrogant, untouchable mob boss was entirely captivated by the fierce intelligence radiating from the exhausted woman in front of him. Lorenzo Moretti and Detective Gallagher thought they had captured the leverage of a helpless civilian. They had no idea they had just handed Dominic the ultimate tactical advantage. "Show me," Dominic said, stepping aside to give her room. Chloe pointed to a blank space on the blueprint, right beneath the main loading zone where Gallagher would likely be holding Liam. "This map is outdated. It doesn't show the old steam pipe maintenance tunnels that run directly beneath the loading bay. They were decommissioned 10 years ago, but the access hatches are still there. If you want to get past 30 armed men and bypass the snipers, you don't go over the water. You go under the concrete." Matteo looked at Dominic, a slow, wicked grin spreading across his scarred face. "She's right, boss. It's a total blind spot. I'm going with you, Chloe stated, looking Dominic dead in the eye. Absolutely not, Dominic replied instantly, the warmth vanishing from his face. It's a bloodbath, Chloe. You gave us the route. You stay here where it's safe. My brother is out there, tied to a wheelchair in the freezing rain, surrounded by monsters who want to put a bullet in his head. Chloe yelled, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. You don't know the tunnel layouts. It's a maze down there, completely dark, and half the passages are flooded. You'll get lost, and Liam will die. I am going. Dominic stared down at her, the tension between them crackling like a live wire. He saw the unyielding steel in her eyes. She wasn't asking for permission. She was stating a fact. With a heavy sigh that conceded a battle he knew he couldn't win, Dominic turned to Silas. Get her a vest, Dominic ordered, his voice dangerously low. The lightest Kevlar we have. If a single scratch appears on her tonight, Silas, I will hold you personally responsible. At 2:45 a.m., the storm broke, leaving behind a thick, suffocating fog that rolled off the dark, churning waters of the East River. Pier 42 was a sprawling graveyard of rusted cranes, towering stacks of steel shipping containers, and cracked asphalt. At the far end of the pier, bathed in the harsh, unnatural glare of portable halogen worklights, stood Lorenzo Moretti. He was a stocky, vicious man with slicked-back grey hair and an expensive camel hair coat. Beside him, smirking under the brim of an umbrella, was Detective Thomas Gallagher, and in the center of the light, soaked to the bone and shivering violently, sat 19-year-old Liam Miller in his wheelchair. His hands were bound tightly behind his back with industrial zip ties. He's late, Gallagher noted, checking his gold Rolex. He pulled his service weapon from his hip, racking the slide with a metallic clack. I told you, Lorenzo, Castiglione doesn't care about a waitress's crippled brother. He's not going to surrender the eastern ports for this trash. Patience, Thomas, Lorenzo rasped, lighting a cigar. Dominic is a man of pride. He won't let us take something from him without a fight. Keep your eyes on the main gate. But Dominic Castiglione didn't come through the main gate. Directly beneath their feet, 30 feet below the cracked asphalt, Chloe was waist-deep in freezing, stagnant water. She waded through the pitch-black maintenance tunnel, a small, waterproof flashlight clenched in her teeth. Behind her, moving with the terrifying silent grace of apex predators, were Dominic, Silvio, Matteo, and a dozen Castiglione soldiers. The stench of rot and rusted iron was overpowering, but Chloe didn't slow down. Her heart hammered furiously against her Kevlar vest. She counted the rusted pipe joints in the dark, using the map permanently etched in her childhood memories. 4, 5, 6. She stopped, raising her hand. Dominic immediately pressed his hand to her shoulder, signaling his men to halt. We're directly under the main loading zone, Chloe whispered, pointing to a heavy iron grate set into the concrete ceiling above them. Faint slivers of halogen light bled through the slats. The hatch opens upward. It comes out right behind the primary crane console. Dominic nodded, pulling his customized, suppressed Kimber 1911 from his shoulder holster. He looked down at Chloe, his cold, calculating eyes softening for a fraction of a second. He reached out, his thumb gently wiping a streak of grease from her cheek. Stay in the tunnel, Dominic whispered, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation this time. When the shooting stops, I will come back and get you. Do you understand? Chloe swallowed hard and nodded. She had brought them to the door. Now the devil of hell's kitchen had to kick it open. Dominic signaled to Silas, who stepped forward and positioned his massive shoulders beneath the iron grate. With a suppressed grunt of immense effort, Silas heaved upward. The rusted hinges let out a faint groan, masked by the sound of the foghorns on the river, and the grate swung open. Topside, Gallagher paced in front of Liam, tapping his gun against his thigh. 3A. M. Lorenzo. Time's up. Let's dump the kid in the river and go home. Gallagher raised his weapon, aiming it directly at Liam's chest. Liam squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the end. Gallagher. A voice roared from the shadows behind the stacked shipping containers. The detective spun around, his eyes wide as Dominic Castiglione stepped into the halo of the halogen lights. He was entirely alone, holding a sleek, silver briefcase. Well, Lorenzo chuckled, his soldiers immediately raising their automatic weapons and training the red laser sights on Dominic's chest. The king of the city graces us with his presence. "Open the briefcase, Dominic. Let me see the port deeds." "Let the boy go first," Dominic demanded, his voice echoing like thunder across the empty pier. He didn't even flinch at the dozen lasers painted over his heart. "You're not in a position to negotiate, Castiglione," Gallagher sneered, stepping closer to Liam and pressing the barrel of his gun against the teenager's temple. "Toss the case, or I paint the asphalt with his brains." Chloe, watching through the crack in the iron grate just 10 feet behind Gallagher, felt her blood run entirely cold. Dominic was creating a distraction, drawing all the attention to the front so his men could emerge from the hatch. But Gallagher was too jumpy. The arrogant, corrupt cop was a wild card, and his finger was trembling on the trigger. He wasn't going to wait. He was going to shoot Liam just to prove a point. Dominic saw it too. His eyes flicked to the hatch, realizing his men wouldn't be able to climb out and acquire targets fast enough to save the boy. He had miscalculated the detective's sheer malice. Chloe didn't think. She didn't hesitate. The underestimated waitress, the woman everyone had dismissed as collateral damage, moved with the desperate, feral speed of a protective sister. She scrambled silently up the rusted ladder, pushing the heavy grate completely open. She didn't have a gun, but she didn't need one. She knew this specific loading zone intimately. Directly beside the hatch was the rusted, heavy iron lever that controlled the emergency pneumatic release for the overhead crane. A crane currently holding a massive, 2-ton shipping container suspended directly above Lorenzo Moretti's heavily armed perimeter guards. As Gallagher tightened his finger on the trigger, screaming, "Drop the case!" Chloe lunged out of the tunnel and slammed her entire body weight against the rusted emergency release lever. With a deafening metallic screech that shattered the quiet night, the pneumatic locks blew. The 2-ton shipping container plummeted from the sky like a meteor. It crashed into the concrete with an earth-shattering explosion, crushing 3 of Lorenzo's parked SUVs and sending a shockwave that threw half the Moretti soldiers off their feet. The distraction was absolute. "Now!" Dominic roared. Hell broke loose on Pier 42. The deafening crash of the 2-ton shipping container masked the metallic clang of the maintenance hatch being thrown wide open. Before the dust plume could even settle, Silas, Matteo, and Silvio surged out of the underground tunnel like demons unleashed from hell. They didn't hesitate. Their suppressed weapons coughed violently, precision fire dropping Lorenzo's disoriented guards before they could even raise their rifles. The sheer arrogance of Lorenzo Moretti had been his undoing. He had planned for a frontal assault over the water. He had never considered that the very ground beneath his feet was a weapon, and he certainly never imagined an underestimated, exhausted waitress from Hell's Kitchen would be the one to pull the trigger. Detective Thomas Gallagher stumbled backward, the shockwave of the falling container knocking him off balance. Panic, raw and ugly, twisted his face. He swung his service weapon away from Liam, desperately searching for a target in the swirling fog and concrete dust. "No!" Gallagher screamed, realizing his men were being slaughtered by the invisible Castiglione forces. Through the smoke, Dominic moved with the terrifying, predatory grace of a reaper. He didn't run. He advanced, with absolute, lethal certainty. Gallagher spotted him and raised his gun, his hands shaking violently. He never got the chance to fire. Dominic's customized Kimber 1911 barked twice. The first hollow point shattered Gallagher's right kneecap, sending the corrupt detective crashing to the wet asphalt with a shrieking wail. The second bullet tore through his shooting hand, destroying the weapon and leaving him completely defenseless. The brutal karma of the streets had finally caught up to the untouchable cop. Lorenzo Moretti, witnessing the utter decimation of his empire in less than 60 seconds, abandoned all pride. The ruthless Mafia boss turned and sprinted toward the only blind spot left on the pier, the rusted crane console, right where Chloe was standing. Through the thick fog, Lorenzo lunged at her, pulling a serrated hunting knife from his coat. "You miserable diner rat," he spat, grabbing her by the collar of her Kevlar vest, intending to use her as a human shield against the advancing Castiglione soldiers. But Chloe Miller was no longer the terrified girl pouring lukewarm coffee. She had survived the diner bombing, the destruction of her apartment, and the pitch-black, flooded tunnels of the East River. As Lorenzo yanked her backward, Chloe didn't pull away. Instead, She leaned into his grip, her hand closing around the heavy, solid steel emergency release pin she had just pulled from the crane console. With every ounce of rage and terror she had endured that night, Chloe drove the heavy steel pin directly into the side of Lorenzo's knee, mirroring the exact injury his men had tried to inflict on Sal just hours ago. Lorenzo howled in agony, his grip on her collar vanishing as his leg buckled. He collapsed onto the rusted, grated walkway, his knife clattering harmlessly away into the dark water below. Before Lorenzo could recover, a massive, impeccably tailored shadow fell over him. Dominic stood above the rival boss, his pale blue eyes glowing with cold, unadulterated fury. "You should have stayed out of my city, Lorenzo," Dominic whispered, his voice slicing through the heavy fog. "And you never should have touched her family." Dominic raised his weapon and ended the Moretti syndicate with a single, definitive pull of the trigger. The gunfire faded, leaving behind the distant wail of foghorns and the groans of the wounded. Dominic immediately holstered his weapon and turned, his boots crunching over shattered glass and brass casings. He walked straight past his men, ignoring the carnage, and dropped to his knees in front of the wheelchair. With swift, gentle hands, Dominic cut the thick industrial zip ties binding Liam. The 19-year-old gasped, slumping forward. Chloe sprinted across the loading zone, dropping to the wet asphalt and throwing her arms around her brother's neck, sobbing uncontrollably into his soaked shirt. "I've got you, Lee. I've got you," she cried, kissing his forehead repeatedly. Dominic stood over them, an impenetrable wall of protection. He pulled his phone from his pocket. "Matteo, secure the perimeter. I want a team from Constellis private security contractors down here in 10 minutes to scrub this pier clean before the uniforms arrive. Silvio, get on the horn with the trauma wing at NYU Langone Medical Center. Tell Dr. Arisov we are bringing in a VIP patient who needs immediate observation. Full lockdown on the floor." Chloe looked up through her tears. The ruthless, untouchable head of the Castiglione family was looking down at her, not as a civilian, not as a liability, but as an absolute equal. She had saved his life in a rundown diner, and he had burned down the eastern seaboard to save her brother. Dominic extended a blood-stained, gloved hand toward her. "Come on, Chloe," he said softly, the icy edge of his voice entirely gone. "Let's take your family home." She reached out, her small, pale hand locking firmly with his. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was stepping out of the harsh, exhausting light of her old life and willingly walking into the dark, dangerous, and fiercely loyal empire of the devil of Hell's Kitchen. And as his strong fingers wrapped around hers, she had never felt safer. What a breathtaking conclusion. From a grease-stained apron in a rundown diner to standing victorious over a fallen Mafia empire, Chloe proved that you should never underestimate a woman fighting for her family. Dominic came to that diner expecting to collect a simple envelope of protection money, but instead, he found a fearless queen willing to walk through hell to protect the people she loves. The karma was absolute. The arrogant men who thought they could bully the weak were destroyed by the very people they overlooked. The intense chemistry between the ruthless mob boss and the fiercely loyal waitress ignited a war that forever changed the city's underworld. If this intense, action-packed Mafia romance kept you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button right now. Share this video with your fellow drama storytelling lovers who crave a plot full of explosive twists, and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another thrilling real-life story. Hit the bell icon to get notified when the next dramatic saga drops. Would you have had the courage to pull that lever? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.